demons, evil spirits, or the devil. In the Christian world, demonic possession happens when an evil entity or paranormal being takes over the human body. Possession has long been part of our culture. Fictional movies like The Exorcist glorified it, bringing the idea that possession can happen to anyone, but reality is far stranger than fiction. Unlike the movies, the next 5 cases aren't scripted. The hauntings and demonic possessions that happened are very real. These are the 5 most terrifying demonic possessions cases. Number 5. Maurice Thorold, the Satan Harvest Story. Maurice was an ordinary tomato farmer. He was a husband, stepdad, and grandfather. But one day, something very terrifying happened to him. What you just saw on tape is Maurice being exorcised by Bishop Robert McKenna. In 1985, the strange things that began happening in the Thorold household escalated. Maurice started experiencing blackouts and he began bleeding from his eyes. Blood started appearing in their house and voices could be heard even when no one was around. What was most shocking was the existence of a supposed doppelganger. His wife would follow this Maurice and he would suddenly disappear. She would head back to the original room only to find him there, unmoved and with no recollection of ever leaving. Several witnesses have also seen the 2 Maurices within seconds of each other. After physical and psychological examinations with 0 results, Ed and Lorraine Warren, paranormal investigators famous for working the Amityville case, were called in. The Warrens suggested exorcism, believing Maurice was possessed by demons. In the tape, you'll hear Bishop McKenna saying an exorcism prayer. Maurice's face is blank with a faraway look. He sits still, but you can clearly see a portion of his skin starting to bubble while the rest begins to crack and crinkle. Then a deep gash right on the side of his head above his eyebrow starts to form. His eyes look serpent-like, and when he's asked, "How many are you?" his eyes roll up. He lowers his head, then collapses. They say he regained consciousness soon after and asked for his wife, Nancy. Witnesses who were present during the rituals say that Maurice's skin was clear once again after the exorcism. Everything seemed fine for years after that, until one day, Maurice took a shotgun and attempted to kill his wife before ultimately turning the gun on himself. What happened to Maurice? Why did his skin bubble up and crack like that? Did the exorcism fail? Whatever it is, the video provides chilling insight about what can happen during an exorcism ritual. Number 4. Michael Taylor. 40 demons. That's the number of demons Michael Taylor carried inside him. Although there are no videos to showcase Michael's exorcism, his story of demonic possession is one of the most controversial and upsetting cases in recent history. Michael lived with his wife Christine, their poodle, and 5 children in Ossett, England. Although the Taylors weren't religious, they began joining the Christian Fellowship group headed by Marie Robinson. Soon Michael began attending religiously and became infatuated with the 21-year-old Robinson. With a newfound faith, Michael's attitude began to change as well. He became short-tempered, argumentative, and spent less time with his family. His fixation with Robinson continued, and soon his wife and those around him noticed. Christine confronted him one day in front of the congregation, accusing him of being unfaithful. To this, Michael exploded and directed his rage at Robinson, lashing out and berating her. It became so intense he had to be restrained. Later on, Michael claimed he couldn't remember doing any of it. With his character clearly deteriorating, the local vicar concluded demonic forces had possessed Michael. On the 5th of October 1974, Father Peter Vincent and Reverend Raymond Smith began the exorcism. Michael started spitting, scratching, and biting, so he had to be restrained on the floor. He was doused with holy water several times, and crucifixes were stuffed in his mouth. He was also forced to confess his sins. Michael continued to growl and snap at anyone who went near him. At 8 a.m. on October 6th, after 8 hours of the ritual, the priests were exhausted. They managed to exorcise 40 demons, including those of bestiality, blasphemy, incest, and more. However, there were still 3 that remained, including anger, murder, and insanity. These 3 had a deep hold on Michael and were to be exorcised the following day. They sent Michael and Christine home to rest. But tragedy would strike that day. At 10 a.m. in the morning, 2 hours after they got home, Michael attacked Christine. He first strangled her, gouged her eyes out, tore out her tongue, and ripped apart her face, all using his bare hands. He then turned to their poodle and tore the poor animal limb from limb. With blood soaking his body, he was found by a patrol car naked and stumbling around the street shouting, "It's the blood of Satan." Is it possible that the remaining demons inside Michael caused him to lash out and murder his wife? Was this perhaps their revenge for being subjected to an exorcism? Michael Taylor was found not guilty due to insanity. He served a total of 4 years in a mental and criminal institution before being released. Number 3, Pope performs exorcism. Exorcism has been a long-standing tradition of the Christian faith, but modern Catholics have seen it as largely taboo. But what if the highest official in the Catholic order is caught performing one? The man in the video is Pope Francis. He's in St. Peter's Square after Mass, offering a prayer of blessings to his devotees. One of the lucky men he approached is Angel V, a 43-year-old Mexican father of 2. In the video, you can see the Pope walking up to him. Angel kisses the Pope's ring, and they shake hands. The priest next to him says something to the Pope, possibly explaining the situation. Soon after, the Pope brings his right hand and places it on Angel's head. Suddenly, his mouth drops open, and a guttural sound emanates from him as the Pope continues to pray. Soon after, he slumps in his wheelchair as the Pope finishes his prayer. Although the Vatican downplayed the incident, saying that the Pope merely laid down a prayer of blessing, it is clear that something was different about this case. According to Reverend Rivas, Angel has been terrorized by over 30 demons and has been exorcised several times, but the demons don't want to leave him. What's even more fascinating about the footage is that you can tell that all those around the Pope, the guards, including the little girl at the corner of the camera, are looking in astonishment at what is happening. The sound emanating from Angel is disturbing. Even if people are normally overcome with joy and emotion when meeting and seeing the Pope, this was clearly something different. Number 2, the Enfield Poltergeist. One of the most controversial poltergeist investigations of recent history, the Enfield Poltergeist has fascinated both skeptics and believers alike.
Hello. Hello. Meow. Margaret's sleeping on talking. Margaret's sleeping on talking. Telling them. Margaret's sleeping on talking. Wow. Oh, shit.
In the tape, you will hear Bill Wilkins, a man that died back in the 70s. You would think this was an ordinary, foul, and gruff-voiced man speaking on tape, except that the voice is coming from 11-year-old Janet Hodgins. In 1977, the Hodgson home was disrupted by a series of strange events. The family started hearing noises and banging from all over the house. Furniture even started moving in front of them with no cause. Afraid there were intruders in the house, the mother, Peggy, called the police. Once arrived, an officer witnessed a chair wobble before moving 4 feet across the room. From then on, it was clear the Hodgson home had an uninvited visitor. Items and objects started flying and whizzing around. Water would appear on the floor, items levitated, and matches would even spontaneously burst into flames. Still, the most unusual aspect of the case was the spirit of Bill Wilkins. This entity was supposed to be a former tenant who had died there. He said, "Just before I died, I went blind, and then I had a hemorrhage, and I fell asleep and died in the chair in the corner downstairs." The shocking part is that when this recording was played on the radio, a man claiming to be Bill's son recognized his father's voice and confirmed the story. Notwithstanding accusations that Janet was faking the voice, no expert came forward to duplicate it, despite the reward offered by Maurice Grosse, a leading paranormal researcher. The Enfield poltergeist has remained an enduring classic, and to this day no one knows how, why, who, or what did all those things to that family. Number 1. Anneliese Michel. Most people know of Anneliese Michel through the movie The Exorcism of Emily Rose. The story in the film was loosely based on the life of this 23-year-old lady. Even though the film was controversial, the events in real life are far more disturbing.
Ja, dann haben wir nicht so viel Macht über die Scheißkerle. Weil mir das ist so nix so.
What you just heard is a snippet from the 42 hours worth of audio recording during the exorcism of Anneliese Michel. Anneliese grew up in an extremely Catholic family with 3 sisters and her parents, Anna and Joseph. She was a devout Catholic and liked by many. However, everything started spiraling when she turned 16. She started suffering from convulsions and was diagnosed with grand mal epilepsy. She took medication, but this didn't do anything to alleviate her pain. But all this was just the start. Soon she began seeing demonic faces while praying. By 1973, she complained of hearing voices telling her she was damned and would rot in hell. At least one neighbor noticed something was off with Anneliese. During a pilgrimage, the woman realized Anneliese purposely veered away from images of Jesus and avoided drinking water from the holy spring. She also said Anneliese smelled hellishly bad. Several priests examined her, and one of them recommended an exorcism. It took 2 requests before the church granted one, assigning 2 Roman Catholic priests, Father Arnold Renz and Pastor Ernst Alt, on her case. During this time, Anneliese started exhibiting bizarre habits including self-harm, outright aggression, eating only insects, and avoiding food in general for fear it would feed the demons further. She was also witnessed licking her own urine from the floor. By 1975, Anneliese and her parents completely resigned her fate to the church. By September, the exorcism rites on Anneliese began. Surprisingly, Anneliese herself recognized it wasn't just one demon, but instead 6 prominent entities, including Judas, Lucifer, Nero, and Cain, among others that possessed her. During the exorcism, she would rip out rosaries from the priest's hands and growl and snarl like a wild animal. She even spent 2 whole days under the kitchen table barking like a dog and refusing to emerge. She would speak in various languages as you heard on the tape, each with its own tone. If you listen to the rest of it, there's even a portion where 2 demons are arguing with each other. The priests, in an attempt to help her, would perform a total of 67 exorcisms, lasting up to 4 hours each. This ran for 10 months, until even Anneliese acknowledged her inevitable fate. On July 1st, 1976, 10 months after the exorcism began, Anneliese Michel died. She was only a husk of her former vibrant self, fully emaciated, with sunken cheeks, broken bones, and weighing only 68 pounds. Her death was controversial as the priests were charged with manslaughter resulting from negligence. Listening to the audio tape of the exorcism is jarring. The rest of the audio recorded can be heard on YouTube. If you do plan to listen to it in full, I suggest you brace yourself. We may consign the idea of demonic possession to the realm of horror films, but the people you just saw and heard genuinely suffered. It's possible they had mental issues beyond our current understandings, but if you believe that, then you have to also entertain the idea that they could have been possessed by spirits we don't understand. Let us know what you think in the comments below, and please remember to subscribe so we can bring you a new Scary Mysteries video each week. Thanks again for watching.
5 people possessed by the devil. People kill for a variety of reasons. Some feel they've been slighted, others in self-defense, and some claim that it was simply something they needed to do. The people on this list are in a different category and claim that they murdered because they were told to do so by demons or the devil. Here are 5 people possessed by the devil. Number 5. Jason Dalton. Married with 2 children, Jason Dalton was 45 years old when he decided to become an Uber driver in Kalamazoo County, Michigan. On February 20th, 2016, shortly before 4 p.m., he picked up his first Uber fare ever, and it was a female college student who refused to take the ride. After 4 p.m., he picked up Matt Mellon. The two made small talk, but Mellon noted Jason received a phone call via Bluetooth, and soon after he began flooring it. Dalton drove erratically towards oncoming traffic, blew through a stop sign, and sideswiped a car. Matt was frantic and begged Dalton to let him out, but he refused. When Dalton briefly stopped, Matt had an opportunity to jump out. A witness reported the incident, and Matt also informed cops. After this, Dalton returned home, picked up his gun, and began to take fares again. He tried to pick up someone but couldn't find this passenger. He circled around, and that's when he spotted Tiana Carruthers. He stopped and asked her if she was the passenger, but she told him no. He then drove off before turning around, pulled the gun out, and began shooting. Tiana was shot 4 times and simply pretended to be dead, hoping Dalton would drive away, and luckily, he did. Jason then went to his parents' house, hitting another car along the way. He hid his vehicle in the garage, asked his wife to meet him there, and used her car instead. He went to their home to leave the gun he used to shoot Tiana and replaced it with another one. Then, he started taking more fares. The passengers he picked up this time did not report any strange incidents at all. They said Dalton didn't behave strangely or gave any indication he had shot and left someone for dead earlier. But close to 10 p.m., things changed. He drove by a car dealership to look at a black BMW, and when he got out of his car, he walked up to 2 people there, father and son Rich and Tyler Smith, and began shooting them. Tyler's girlfriend, Alyssa, was in the Range Rover close by. She saw everything and dialed 911 to report what had happened. Dalton drove off and came upon a group of older women at a parking lot of a Cracker Barrel. Mary Lou Nye was inside her vehicle when Dalton approached her and shot her in the head. As the other women screamed, he began shooting them as well. All 4 were shot and initially reported as being dead, but 14-year-old Abigail, a niece of one of the women, survived the shooting. Dalton went back to his family's home and for some reason fired several shotgun shells inside his shed, which his neighbor heard. He then left and began taking Uber fares once again. He shuffled several passengers back and forth without further incident. Cops tagged his vehicle based on eyewitness accounts, and although they had no idea that the killer was an Uber driver, they believed the shooter would target nightclubs where people gathered. Officers eventually pulled him over, and during the pat-down they realized he had a gun. Surprisingly though, he never put up a fight, something the officers were expecting given the carnage he left behind. As for his reasons, this is where it gets strange. Even though he was asked multiple times, Dalton initially said he didn't have a reason, but after interrogation he finally said that it was his Uber app that made him do it. He claimed that his Uber mobile app would pop up a symbol resembling the Order of the Eastern Star, a Freemason group. For a brief time, another app, which had the symbol of the devil, would flash on his Uber app, and he would press it when it appeared. Once he did this, he said that something overtook him and he would begin to kill. When the officers pulled him over that night, he waited for the app to pop up again, but it never did, so he didn't think it was necessary to kill the police officer who approached his car, and thus he just surrendered peacefully. Currently, Dalton is undergoing a psychiatric evaluation to see if he is fit for trial. Number 4. Satan-worshipping gang. An upside-down cross marked the area where 4 teenagers were killed and sacrificed in a ritualistic killing in the city of Yaroslav, Russia. The victims ranged between 16 and 17 years old, and all were referred to as living a goth lifestyle. In a span of 2 days, the victims disappeared after telling their parents they were attending a music festival. but this was a lie since the festival was still a month away. During the police investigation, they discovered the victims had one thing in common. All four had contacted Nikolai Ogolobic prior to their disappearance. The victims were lured by the suspects on two separate occasions. The first set of victims was Olga and Anna, who were brought by the group on June 28, 2008 to a forest near Nikolai's home. They were given alcohol before they were attacked by the gang of 8 Satanists, with Nikolai as the leader. After killing them, they chopped up their bodies, cooked some parts, and ate them. The following day, on June 29th, they lured a girl named Vyra and her boyfriend Andre. They also gave them alcohol before eventually killing and chopping them up as well. Police discovered the grisly scene on August 12th when they found a pit with some of the victims' arms and legs inside of it. All of the victims' heads, arms, and legs were removed. Others had their hearts, genitals, and scalps taken. During the crackdown, police arrested 8 suspects, all members of the satanic cult. They confessed to the crime, admitting victims were used in a ritualistic sacrifice. They also revealed grisly details about the murders, saying each victim was stabbed exactly 666 times. One of the suspects, Alexander Voronovic, also said they once dug up a girl's grave and then ate her heart. All of them pled guilty and were charged with murder. 4 of them were charged for desecrating the bodies of victims. One was found to be criminally insane and admitted to a psychiatric hospital, while another was released under his own cognizance and charged with criminal complicity. The suspects, who were teenagers themselves during the crime, were sentenced to varying degrees of jail time, the highest being just 20 years. Number 3. Carl Drew, the Fall River Cult. In the middle of Fall River, Massachusetts, 3 young women were brutally tortured and murdered between October 1979 and February of 1980. The first victim was 17-year-old Doreen Levesque, and her body was found on October 13, 1979. She was a runaway who had turned to prostitution. When she was discovered, her wrists were bound with fishing line and she had been sexually tortured. There were stab wounds on her head and signs that a brutal beating had taken place. Police thought because of what she did for a living, a client had most likely killed her. But during the autopsy, the coroner ruled that multiple individuals were involved in her death. They also suggested ritualistic overtones and that she was stoned to death. A month after the discovery, Andy Maltius visited the police station and reported his 22-year-old girlfriend, Barbara Raposa, missing. Andy was mentally unstable and a pedophile, but he still reported her missing, fearing her life may be in danger. He said that he and Barbara were part of a satanic cult, and he may know people that had info about Doreen's murder as well. He pointed to friends and lesbian lovers Robert Murphy and Karen Marsden. They were brought in, and during their interview, Karen rambled and seemed nervous, while Robin was quiet and observed police. Finally, from pressure or nervousness, Karen broke down in tears and told police that a man named Carl Drew killed Doreen. Carl was known to the local police as a notorious 26-year-old pimp. Karen said Carl was the devil and built his prostitution ring around a satanic coven. She also told cops that if she turned up dead, it was Drew who killed her. On January 26, 1980, the body of Barbara Raposa was found in an abandoned printing factory. Like Doreen, her wrists were bound with fishing line and she had been sexually assaulted. Her skull had been crushed with a rock, and the first suspect was, of course, her boyfriend Andy. At first, he denied involvement but later claimed to have had a psychic dream about what happened. Police played along with him, and Andy brought them to the crime scene where he described details only cops knew at the time. He was then arrested as the prime suspect, and days later, Robin Murphy called investigators with more information. She said she would testify against Andy because she was there when he killed Barbara. She also claimed she was present at Doreen's murder too. She said Andy killed Barbara and threatened her with the same fate if she ever told anyone. Robin was then given immunity and placed under protective custody. On Doreen's murder, Murphy said she was killed as an offering of the soul to Satan, and she pointed the finger at Carl Drew as the main suspect for that. But Karen's testimony told a different story. She said Murphy played a more active role in the killings and in fact directed others to take part in the killing of Barbara, so they would keep silent as accomplices. Unfortunately, Karen was an unreliable witness because of her drug use, nervous behavior, and inconsistent testimony, so police couldn't make any arrest or move forward. But Karen told police she was going to be the next victim, and sure enough, on February 9, 1980, she was reported missing. 2 months later, someone stumbled across the top half of a human skull while in the woods, and it turned out to be Karen's. Investigators received a tip stating that Carl Drew and Robin Murphy were responsible, and they were brought in. In the end, Carl Drew was sentenced to life in prison without parole, while Andy also received the same sentence for Barbara's death. Meanwhile, Robin was charged with second-degree murder and received a reduced sentence of life in prison with the possibility of parole. She was released briefly before being incarcerated again for a parole violation. Last year, she was denied parole after lacking credibility because she kept changing her story about what she witnessed during the crimes and how they happened. However, she'll be up for parole again in 2022. Number 2. John Jenkin. Just 48 hours after being released from a mental institution, 24-year-old John Jenkin killed his mother Alice McMeekin and 20-year-old sister Catherine in their Milham, England home in 2013. 2 days prior, John walked up to a van driver in a deranged state. He dropped down a bag, put his hands up in the air and said, "I am armed, but it's not with my hands." Then he said he was going to kill his ma'am. "We both know it's going to happen. I will find somewhere quiet when it's done." He kept repeating the fact that he was going to kill his own mother, and afterwards, the driver called police to inform them of the incident. 2 hours after this, John was spotted near a nature reserve covered in blood from cuts he had made on his wrists using shells. He was taken to jail, and within minutes, the prison psychiatrist knew he was suffering from a mental illness. He was then taken to a nearby mental institution for further assessment. During the 90-minute session, he told the psychiatric nurse that he had taken a cocktail of drugs that included LSD. Despite this, they concluded that he was not a threat to himself or others and released him to the care of his mother. The night before the killings, John went out with his friends for a drink and he was seen displaying bizarre behavior. At some point, he challenged a group to a fight, tried to kiss a woman he didn't know, and also ate chocolate off of the dirty floor. By 5:10 a.m., he was seen in the back streets by a neighbor waving a knife above his head and shouting that he was possessed by demons and he was the devil and needed to confess. 3 hours later, a neighbor heard a ruckus inside the Jenkin home. Apparently, John had woken up in bed, marched downstairs carrying a hatchet he kept beside him, and started hitting his mother over the head. When his sister came down to see what happened, she began screaming and tried to escape, and that's when he also attacked and killed her. He also killed his pet dog, and afterwards left the house and walked half a mile to an estuary where he was seen naked, crawling on the ground. He was taken in by police and examined, where he stated he killed his mother and sister in the heat of the moment. John was ordered to serve a minimum of 12 years in prison, but he would continue treatment at the Ashworth Hospital in Merseyside. If he recovered before the 12 years, he would be transferred to the prison. The judge made it clear that under no way would he be released until the parole board is satisfied that he will no longer be a threat to anyone. Let's just hope they don't make the same mistake as the psychiatric nurse did. Number 1. Arnie Johnson. It started on July 3, 1980 in Brookfield, Connecticut, when 11-year-old David Glatzel woke up in the middle of the night screaming after seeing, as he stated, a man with black eyes, a thin face with animal features and jagged teeth, pointed ears, horns, and hoofs. The beast creature warned him to beware. Soon, David began experiencing more night terrors and started acting strangely. He would get unexplained scratches all over his body and became quiet and nervous. His sister Debbie asked her fiancé, Arnie Johnson, to move in with them to help David, but this didn't seem to work. David's condition only worsened, and he began having visions and terrors. They asked a priest to bless the home, but again, this only worsened the situation. Louder sounds in the attic and around the house were heard, and David began seeing visions of the demonic man even during the daytime. He also started speaking in multiple voices and would hiss at his family in a menacing way. With no signs of it waning, the Glatzels contacted self-proclaimed demonologists Ed and Lorraine Warren. They concluded that David was possessed by 43 demons and decided to hold a series of exorcisms to free the boy. The Warrens, along with 4 priests, conducted 3 exorcism sessions, but during one of these, Arnie made an unfortunate move. He taunted one of the demons to enter him, saying they were too afraid. After the exorcism was completed, the Warrens called the police, asking them to keep an eye out on Arnie. By November of 1980, things seemed to be going okay. Arnie and Debbie moved into their own place, an apartment owned by Alan Bono. But Arnie had begun to change. Despite being noted as a good guy by friends and family, he started getting into trouble. Debbie also said he would go into trances, claim to see a beast man, and sometimes growl at nothing. On February 16, 1981, Arnie spent the day with Debbie, his sister Wanda, and Debbie's 9-year-old cousin Mary. School was closed, and they hung out in the kennel where Debbie and Wanda worked. By lunchtime, the property owner, Alan Bono, invited them over for lunch. The men began drinking, and at some point there was uneasiness between them. By the time they reached the kennel again, a fight had broken out. Debbie tried to get Wanda and Mary out of the room, but Alan grabbed Mary, refusing to let her go. This is when Arnie pulled out a knife and stabbed Alan through the stomach and in his heart. He then stabbed Alan several more times before leaving the scene. During the trial, Arnie's attorney thought it was worth entering a not guilty plea by virtue of demonic possession, but this was not accepted by the judge, stating there was no way to prove it. Eventually, they went with self-defense, but the jury still found Arnie guilty. He was sentenced for up to 20 years, but served only 5. After he was released, he and Debbie married and are still living happily ever after today. So there were 5 people possessed by the devil. There are many things in this world we can explain, and some things we simply can't. While it can be hard to believe that a demon could possess someone to do the unthinkable, perhaps it is possible. If you like this video, then please remember to subscribe and click the notification bell because we have new videos coming out every single week we know you'll want to check out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon. Inside prison walls, a person can go crazy. Year after year, locked inside a cage, but then again, you could say their crazy acts are what got them there in the first place. But what if something beyond themselves is gripping them slowly and taking over? Something evil, perhaps. Whether it happened before they got to jail or while behind bars, these stories today are terrifying. There are 5 incarcerated people possessed by demons. Number 5. Michael Taylor. In the small town of Ossett, England, an incident unfolded in 1974 that was utterly chaotic and unexpected. And at the center of it all, 30-year-old Michael Taylor. Michael was a rather unremarkable man, someone who lived a quiet, unassuming life as a butcher with his wife Christine. The two attended church regularly, but something inside Taylor was brewing. A dark desire and a lust he was finding hard to control. Christine, noticing changes in her husband's behavior, sought help from the one place she knew she could find it, with the other members of her church in the Garber Christian Fellowship Group. She shared with them that her husband had a carnal desire to be with the lay leader of the group, Marie Robinson, and she feared that he may act on it. Well, this was big news in the small church gathering of this small town, and so people began to talk. As the controversy grew, so did the darkness within Michael, and so he felt he needed to confront Robinson about why she was teasing him with these unwanted desires. He unleashed a torrent of venomous words towards her. She came right back, claiming that it was all in his mind. Afterwards, he settled down, and seeking forgiveness for his actions, the man asked for absolution from the congregation. His plea was heard and granted. However, his behavior only grew more erratic from there. He then became more hostile not only towards his wife, but also to those around him. In an effort to save Michael's troubled soul, the church's local vicar sought the help of ministers who were well versed in exorcisms. It was in St. Thomas Church in Gobber the exorcism happened. An Anglican priest and a Methodist clergyman joined forces with the congregation to help cast out the sinister forces that had supposedly taken hold of Taylor's being. The exorcism occurred over the course of 2 harrowing nights in October of 1974. According to their reports, there were 40 malevolent spirits, each embodying unspeakable vileness, that were cast out from the possessed man. He seemed better, but no one was sure if he was completely cured, as witnesses said there was still a feeling of unease, a suspicion that the battle against evil may be far from over. Nonetheless, the church released him and declared him cleansed. And Taylor and his wife subsequently returned to their home, and that's when the real beast came out. Still consumed by the darkness, Michael, without warning, attacked Christine with his bare hands. The woman tried to fight back but was easily overpowered. In the ensuing violent fit of rage, Taylor tore at his wife's eyes and pulled her tongue out. The police report indicated that the woman was found with her face almost torn off from her skull. The couple's pet poodle wasn't even spared. He went on to strangle the poor animal as well. Taylor was then found wandering the street by a policeman on patrol, covered with blood and without clothing. He was arrested, and an eventual trial took place. Surprisingly, the court acquitted him of the murder charge on the grounds of mental instability. He was instead sent to a psychiatric hospital where he spent 2 years in treatment and was released afterwards. The bizarre nature of Michael Taylor's case continues to attract the public's attention to this day, some questioning if it was really the demons that forced him to commit such acts, or was it actually his innate violent nature? Either way, should this man really be let out to roam free? Number 4. Trial of Arnie Cheyenne Johnson. This is the story of the first time in American history that a defense lawyer had attempted to use demonic possession as the reason for their client committing their crimes. It's now well known as the "Devil Made Me Do It" case, and has since gone on to spawn several books, documentaries, and films. So, let's dig into how this came to be. It all began in the summer of 1980 in Brookfield, Connecticut, when 11-year-old David Glatzel was at the new rental house of 19-year-old Arnie Johnson, whose fiancée was David's older sister Debbie. They were there cleaning up the unit in preparation of moving in. That's when David says an old, burnt, and black-looking man pushed him onto a bed, telling him that if they moved in, he would bring harm to the family. At first they thought maybe David was making up a story so that his sister wouldn't move away, but back at home, David's visions of the man continued, and there was more than just his stories to confirm that what he was saying may actually be true. David kept seeing visions of the old man, who he described as having big black eyes, a thin face with animal features and jagged teeth, pointed ears, horns, and hoofs. This kid was terrified from these night terrors, and he had scratches and bruises showing up, so everyone was getting worried. Arnie would come over to the house to help, and having the young man around could calm the boy down, but as they tried to get him to relax while also going about their day-to-day responsibilities, the young boy's visions worsened over the next week. The family themselves were hearing strange noises in the attic as well, and eventually, Glatzels made a call to famed demonologist Ed and Lorraine Warren to come and perform an exorcism on David, as it was becoming apparent something was seriously wrong, that maybe this old man's spirit had attached itself to him and wasn't bluffing about hurting the family. Arnie was there throughout the exorcism, and at one point during one of the sessions, he actually taunted this demon, telling it, "Take me on. Leave my little buddy alone." Terrifyingly, all those who were present claimed to have actually witnessed the demonic transference. Young David seemed to have been released by the grips of the spirit, but Johnson now was tied to the forces of darkness. While out driving shortly after, Arnie lost control of his vehicle and crashed right into a tree. He was unharmed, fortunately, but he claimed that it was the demon that took the wheel and pulled him right off the road. Meanwhile, David's condition didn't actually improve much. He was still seeing visions. Debbie and Arnie needed to get out of the family's house, but didn't want to rent the original property they had chosen, since all this chaos started there. So they found an apartment they could rent. It was owned by Alan Bono, who Debbie worked for at a dog kennel as a groomer. It was during this time when she began to notice her boyfriend acting strange, similar to that of her younger brother. He would growl and hallucinate, but when asked later on, he said he had no memory of his actions. And then on February 16th of 1981, the unexpected happened. On that day, Bono took the Glatzel siblings, Debbie's 9-year-old cousin Mary, along with Arnie for lunch at a local restaurant. The landlord had a couple too many drinks there. When they all returned to the kennel after, an argument broke out, and Debbie tried to take her cousin away, but Bono reportedly grabbed the little girl and wouldn't let her go. This infuriated Johnson, who was then heard making that same eerie growling sound he had been making. Things escalated to the point, and Johnson drew a 5-inch pocket knife, and he stabbed Bono repeatedly in the chest and stomach. The man would go on to die several hours later. The trial that eventually followed captivated the world's attention, as the defendant's lawyer boldly claimed that the accused was possessed by demons at the time of the killing. The judge, however, cited the lack of empirical evidence and deemed the defense impossible to prove in the court of law. As a result, Johnson was found guilty of first-degree manslaughter and then sentenced to 20 years in prison. He got out early due to good behavior. While in prison, the convicted killer received an education and got married to Debbie. And life for him and David eventually went back to normal, or at least as normal as it could be after this. And so it appears, if in fact there were a demon involved, since they decided not to move in, the old man eventually left them alone. Number 3. Adrian Dow. People kill others for various reasons. For Adrian Dow, his reason was simple: to gain street cred. Dow was only 22 when he was incarcerated in an Ottawa jail in 2013 for a separate minor offense. But that year, he willingly confessed to Detective John Manette a shocking crime that supposedly took place a couple years prior. The confession was elicited while the inmate was clearly exhibiting symptoms of schizophrenia and seeking ways to escape solitary confinement. At the time, he had been kept in isolation for 22 days, which led him to engage in self-harm. That situation prompted correctional officers to make him wear a straitjacket. He was paranoid and delusional, and Dow believed that he was possessed by demons, and that he needed to cut off his fingers to rid himself of evil. And because of this, he was fork-fed through the hatch in the door just to prevent him from biting off his own fingers. It was while in this dire condition that he confessed to the detective that he was the one responsible for the murder of Jennifer Stewart. The 36-year-old sex worker had been found dead in a parking lot in Vanier, Ontario, having been struck multiple times by an axe back in 2010. Police recorded his first confession, where he expressed his desire to claim the reward for the unsolved killing. He even requested a transfer to a federal prison, where he planned to establish his rap career. He was clearly not in a good state of mind, and his confession was riddled with inconsistencies. He first claimed that he used a knife to slay Stewart, when in fact, as mentioned, it was an axe. The man went on to reveal that he repeatedly hacked the victim in the torso area, but the autopsy results showed that there were no injuries there. At this point, Manette felt that Dow really had no understanding of the case he supposedly created, that he had got his information all from the news, and that it wasn't necessarily firsthand. As for his motive behind the confession in the first place, he said he wanted to gain respect in the hip-hop community, and as a result become a successful rapper with Stewart's murder under his belt. Regardless of these inconsistencies in his story, he was brought to trial for the crime. He told the jury he should not be held accountable for it because the CIA ordered him to do it. He pled not guilty, but regardless, after a psychiatrist explained the man's condition, the court convicted him for the murder of Stewart. Dow was undergoing treatment for the mental health issues, but he was sentenced to 25 years behind bars with no chance of parole for a crime he quite possibly may have never committed. Which means the killer is still out there. Number 2. John Shipley. It was in July 2022 when John Shipley of Edmonds, Washington called 911, frantically confessing to authorities the murder of his 66-year-old wife, Susan. During the call, the 73-year-old also claimed that he was possessed by demons, that he was subhuman, that he had been under their influence for most of his life, and it now just came to a head. When authorities arrived at their home, they were met with a chaotic scene in the living room. Susan laying lifeless, and 2 knives on the floor, and her husband sitting right there beside her. But it wasn't immediately clear if she had actually been stabbed to death. Upon a closer look, the investigators determined the cause of death as asphyxiation due to strangulation. And John explained that it was the satanic demons that instructed him to commit the crime. Mr. Shipley was immediately brought to the hospital for a mental evaluation, where the findings revealed some disturbing details. In a statement, John said his life had been plagued by demonic influence. It was in April of that same year that he became fully aware of the extent of his possession. When asked about his decision to call police, he said that he'd wanted the authorities to destroy him because what he had done was utterly brutal. So from a human standpoint, he knew what he had done was wrong, but the demons took control and he just had to do it. And this wasn't the first time that the law had a run-in with the suspect. Just months earlier, officers found the elderly man standing naked in the street. He was, as described, in a catatonic state and unresponsive during that incident. Medical records meanwhile revealed that Shipley had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Now detained, the septuagenarian faces a second-degree murder charge for the killing of his spouse. So, it appears it wasn't demons at all, but a mentally unwell man who will now spend the rest of his life behind bars. Number 1. Clarita Villanueva. In 1953, a young woman named Clarita Villanueva, an orphan from Bacolod, Philippines, found herself locked up in the infamous Bilibid prison in Manila for vagrancy. Unknowingly, her time in that place would become a battleground between the forces of good and evil, as she became the center of the country's first case of demonic possession. Clarita grew up in a household filled with witchcraft and fortune-telling by her mother. When the matriarch passed away, the young girl decided to venture out to the country's capital city, Manila, to look for her father. To sustain her stay, she worked various menial jobs, including housekeeping. As time went on, she had herself become involved in prostitution, which got her in trouble with the law. And these choices she made are what eventually led her to the old Bilibid prison, where her encounter with the forces of evil took place. On May 9th of 1953, Clarita and her fellow inmates experienced a disturbance when tiny pebbles were being thrown inside their cell, coming from out of nowhere. Then on that same night, while Clarita was trying to sleep, she saw what she called the Thing, perched on a beam above her. The apparition then jumped onto her, causing her immense pain. She described this entity to be a 10-foot tall, dark man with curly hair and an angelic face. Her screaming consequently roused the attention of the whole prison. And curious, the next day the mayor at the time summoned the prisoner to her office, where she exhibited some disturbing behavior. Suddenly, she began to screech in terror, saying the invisible creatures were biting her body. This prompted the guards to restrain her, and still she insisted that someone was gnawing at her fingers. Doctors and the prison chaplain were called, but they themselves could not explain the situation. Was she just acting? Perhaps, but it all seemed very real to those who were present. And even if it wasn't real, the woman made a convincing case that she believed it was happening. The extent of her demonic possession came to a point that she began to cast death wishes and misfortune to those who dared to speak against her. For instance, a physician came to visit and interviewed her. For no apparent reason, she gazed at the man and foretold of his death. And sure enough, the next day the doctor suffered a heart attack at the same hour she said it would happen. Similarly, a prison officer who allegedly mistreated Clarita suffered sudden heart failure after she cursed him. Salvation eventually came when a Protestant missionary heard about the prisoner's situation. Pastor Lester Sumrall was at the time overseeing the construction of a church in Manila. When Clarita finally got to meet Pastor Sumrall, she instantly threw out some hateful words towards him. Surprisingly, she was hurling insults in English despite the fact that she could only speak Filipino. Sumrall's initial attempt to exorcise the woman seemed to have failed, and soon local newspapers were covering the sensational news about this woman's demonic possession. Determined to succeed, the pastor decided not to give up. He turned to prayer and fasting while seeking guidance, strength, and support from his congregation. Through his unwavering effort, he was able to reportedly cast out the demons inside the woman. However, in a matter of days, the evil forces supposedly returned, claiming their right on the victim's being. The preacher fought on once again, and this time he finally helped vanquish the malevolent spirits for good. Following her deliverance, Clarita Villanueva was transferred to a welfare facility where she eventually found her freedom, both physically and spiritually. So there were 5 incarcerated people possessed by demons,